With you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Brian Menzel, Deputy Public Works Director for Streets, and I'm sitting in for Jeremy and Danger on that services.
Welcome.
Thank
you. Corey Aldridge, Missoula Urban Transportation District.
Vicki Cernich, proxy for Carol Strizich, MDT Planning.
Donnie Pfeiffer, MDT Pre-Construction in the Missoula District.
Ellen Buchanan, Missoula Redevelopment Agency.
Benjamin Schmidt, Health Department, proxy for Sarah Cofield.
Shane Stack with Missoula County.
Jeremy Keene, Interim Director for Development Services.
Dory Brownlow with Missoula County.
Juniper Davis, Missoula County Parks, Trails, and Open Lands.
Chet Krauser, Missoula County Community and Planning Services.
I guess start off in the crowd, Dave.
Aaron Wilson with Missoula MPO.
All right. Thank you. And then we'll, I guess, start off with approval of minutes. So were there any comments or concerns about the minutes from last month's meeting? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. And any abstention, same sign. All right, that passes. Public comment? All right, seeing none. New business, review and recommend TPCC approval of the 2020 Unified Planning Work Program. Aaron.
Thanks. I don't know that I have too much to present on this at this point. We haven't changed a whole lot since we presented the draft last month. What we have done is gone through and updated some of the values and amounts and staff costs, things like that, in the budget. So we've updated some of those tables, and I think the document that you have doesn't have the most up-to-date summary of our funding. So I thought I would just kind of walk through that really quick and give the highlights of what we're proposing to do with our PL funds this year. And then if anyone has any comments or edits or things that we should change before this goes to TPCC for adoption in a couple of weeks, that would be great. So kind of just walking through this, that's really hard to see. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So we have the breakdown and kind of a comparison between the FY19 and the FY20 budgets, and a lot of it is staying relatively consistent to the last year's work plan. Some of that is because projects that we had started in FY19 are going to carry over into FY20. But in general, our administration and program support, those amounts don't typically change too much, only a little bit based on staff administrative costs and how we're allocating hours. Where the bulk of the changes are coming in this year are in the long range transportation planning and area plans. So we are finally kicking off or really diving into our long-range plan update in FY20. So there's an increase there in both PL funds for a consultant and staff time. We have some money going into area transportation plans again this year. Some of that is a carryover. So we have the East Missoula corridor study that we started in FY19 will carry over obviously into FY20. We also have some funds in there for, last month had asked about funding for other plans like supporting the master planning and getting some transportation pieces in the master planning for the area west of Reserve between Mullen and Broadway. Also had requests from the county to do some planning around Reserve Street, and so we had planned to budget some funding there to do some initial kind of visioning, scoping with the community about their views of Reserve Street to give us sort of a start on where we can potentially start making some planning or improvements along that corridor. And then with the data collection, we have the pavement condition analysis. Again, that we have that contract, I think, almost ready to go. And so that's going to start here in FY19, but will carry over into FY20. So we have some of those costs carrying over. And then we have the model update, which we had planned to start in FY19. And I think we have that. We'll have hopefully have that contract signed later this month. Dave is going to give a quick update on that this afternoon, or this morning, later in this meeting. So those are the main components of this plan and the changes between FY19 and FY20. So at the end of this fiscal year, if we spend all of those funds, we'll still have about $300,000 in our PL reserve. That number actually probably will be significantly higher because we've budgeted for things like East Missoula and the pavement condition and the model update in both FY19 and FY20 because those are carrying over, and we're sort of had planned to get them started in FY19. Some of them came along a little bit later, so most of those costs are going to carry over, and we don't get those adjustments until typically the following fiscal year. So we should hopefully see that adjustment in our PL funds for FY 2021, but we'll also have potentially have the rescission that may eat up most or all of those, some undetermined amount of those reserve PL funds. So I think we're in a reasonably good place. We're getting a lot of work done, and we still have hopefully some PL funds left at the end of the day. So that is, I think, all I have. If there are comments or thoughts on either how we're spending our funds or other details in the plan, I'd be happy to take those comments.
All right. If we don't have any questions or comments, there's a recommended motion.
Okay, I'll recommend that TPCC approve the 2020 Unified Work Program as proposed.
Okay, we need a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. And any further additional comments from the board? Public comment? Hearing none. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. And any abstention, same sign. All right, motion passes, and hopefully somebody besides Dory is going to do motions today.
All right, thanks.
The next item is review and recommend TPC approval of the 2020-2024 Transportation Improvement Program. Michael.
All right, good morning. My name is Michael Harpool, Transportation Planner for the Missoula MPO. Today I'm presenting on the Transportation Improvement Program for fiscal years 2020 to 2024. So there have been a few updates since we met last. First, I'm going to go through some of the updates we made to the narrative of the TIP. So in the process and development section, we added a little subsection for project selection, which goes into some of the tools that the MPO uses to prioritize projects. And those are included in the Bicycle Facilities Master Plan, the Long Range Transportation Plan, and the Pedestrian Facilities Master Plan. We also added another subsection about the amendment process, where we discuss, how we go through amendments, bring it to you and then to TPCC. And then also we have a part in there that discusses how to identify amendments within the program itself. We also made some changes to the performance management section. We outlined the importance and purpose of establishing performance measures for our national goal areas, including safety, infrastructure, system performance, freight, CMAC, and transit asset management. That we list the performance measures and targets supported by the MPO, So the MPO supports state measures for the first 5 listed there, and then supports MUTD's Transit Asset Management Plan. And then we cite funding sources that impact projects specific to those national area or national goal areas, and we also link to supporting documentation if applicable. So just as an example here, we have the safety performance measures. In the first little area of bullets, we have the listed national performance measures, and then we also have the performance measures and performance targets from MDT and that are supported by the MPO. And then we cite the Montana Comprehensive Highway Safety Plan in there as well. Some of the additional changes that we made to the program, we added the redesignation from non-attainment status to maintenance status for PM10, particulate matter 10. We updated project list tables. So we have 2 project lists in the program. So those projects that are regionally significant and projects exempt from regional analysis. We also added a public comment received section at the end of the document to cite, the comments that we received from the public and the number of attendees at our meetings. We also have the funding tables now make note of roadway reference posts to communicate project location and mileage, and also include a column for prior project expenditures. We then added national highway. So since the last time we met, within the actual funding source tables, we added national highway and bridge funding for the Russell Street project. So I'll go through those few tables, but the rest of the updates you saw last time we met. So for the surface transportation program, urban, there was an $80,000 increase in the incidental construction phase of the Broadway to Idaho portion of the Russell Street project. Construction costs for Idaho to Dakota increased to $10.8 million, and Dakota to Mount, there was $2.6 million added for right-of-way in 2021, $3 million added for incidental construction in 2021, and construction costs updated to $8.7 million in 2024. For National Highway, we have Dakota to Mount portion of the Russell Street project added to the NH table, $4.8 million added to the preliminary engineering phase, and $3.4 million added to the right-of-way phase. And the last portion of the Russell Street project, we have the bridge program. So we have Broadway to Idaho portion of the Russell Street project added to show $12 million of previous funding. So we have a few options here today. Option 1 would be recommend that TPCC approve the Missoula Transportation Improvement Program for federal fiscal years 2020 to 2024. And option 2 is do not recommend that TPCC approve the Missoula Transportation Improvement Program for federal fiscal years 2020 to 2024. And MPO staff recommends option 1.
Okay. Any questions for Michael or comments on the tip? All right. Hearing none, we'll need a motion. There's a recommended motion.
I would recommend the TPCC approval of the 2020 to 2024 Transportation Improvement Program.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Any public comment? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. And any abstention, same sign. All right. Motion passes. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you all.
All right. Next item, 4.3 is Transportation Demand Model Update Scope and Consultant Selection. David.
Good morning, everybody. Dave Gray, Missoula MPO. Just have a quick update on where we are with the travel demand model. We issued an RFP at the beginning of last month, and we got 2 proposals back. The deadline for those was the 23rd. After we scored the proposals, LSA was selected, and they may sound familiar because they're the ones who initially built the model, and then they've updated the model every 4 years since then. So this is just an update, it's not a rebuild, and so we had a limited amount of money. So we went out with an approximate $80,000 budget, and everybody came in under that. Actually, LSA came in even farther under than the other people. Some of the work that they will be doing for this is updating all the socioeconomic data. We're going to be working with the city and the county as they're going through their growth policy plans, and making sure that we're getting housing allocated where both the city and the county are foreseeing growth. So the forecast year is going to be 2050. So the MPO will be purchasing, unless we can work with MDT on getting employment data. So we'll have location-based employment data, and then housing, and that's really the underlying data that drives the model. So production and traction, where people are coming from, where they're going. And in addition to the basic data update, LSA is going to build a land use importer for it. It's a module that allows us to run different land use scenarios. So increasing densities in different parts of town and running through it and being able to apply it quickly and efficiently. And then for the next model update, we'll be able to import everything instead of having to go through a fairly detailed building permit assessment and everything else that goes into this, which is going in this time. So the land use importer, and now that GPS data has matured and they worked many of the kinks out, we're going to be using GPS origin and destination data so that we'll better know where people are coming and going. So that will be used to validate and calibrate the model. Then also the bike ped counts from our permanent counters will be integrated and also used to make sure that the model's running right for non-motorized stuff, aside from using vehicle counts, which is typical anyway. Transit network will be upgraded, and we're going to need to work with MUTD on getting boarding and alighting and whatever other kind of data that we may need. So we hope to get the contract through by the end of the month so they can start up. We're hoping that maybe the contract will be done today so we can get it into council next week, but that's not going to be the case. So we'll have to wait for a little while, but hopefully we can get it through council before TPCC at the end of the month. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Dave? Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I just wanted to say I was excited to hear that you are looking at the origin destination data that's out there. I think that's going to be a pretty significant improvement on the previous model to have that real data built into the way it's calibrated. And Aaron and I had a conversation about that the other day.
We would have done it earlier, but they're still working out kinks, and I think now that it's been out there for a while that they've worked out all the bugs.
So this is an update to the model, but do you feel like it's going to give us a more robust tool going into our next transportation plan update?
It's going to give us, so the model covers Ravalli and Missoula County entirely. So origin and destination coming out of Ravalli can get kind of questionable. We know how many vehicles are entering at the county line, but exactly where they're going is kind of an issue. It has been, but the model's not incorrect. It's just not, it hasn't been as accurate as it could be with this new GPS data.
Will this give us better information at kind of the sub-area level, where we're looking at specific road networks or new connections?
Well, yes, within the limitation of a regional model. Any kind of real sub-area needs to get into microsimulation rather than the regional model, which is the next step.
Any additional questions? Good. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
About how many non-motorized counting stations are there?
How many non-motorized stations do we have? We have 8, and then we're going to have 4 more on Russell, and we're hoping to get at least 1 on Higgins. We'll see how that works out. But we have 6 portable bike ped counters that we can put out wherever we want.
Cool, thanks.
All right, any additional questions? All right. Dave, thank you. Appreciate the update.
Yep.
All right, under old business, presentation on the draft BBER Transportation Survey draft questions.
All right, thanks. So we're moving pretty quickly on our transportation survey. We took all of the feedback we got from TTAC and TPCC and others last month, worked with BBER, and kind of came up with a list of priority needs or information needs that we sent along to BBER. And then John Baldridge worked on crafting the questions. And one of the things that he does really well, or BBER does, is look at what national or other locations are at, how they're asking these questions, so that our survey will either be comparable, or we're using questions that have already been tested and run through surveys, and so we know that they have eliminated as much of the bias and other issues, and we're not starting from scratch and having to deal with those ourselves. So I thought I would just kind of quickly, go through the list of questions and the information needs that they're based on, and then what I think would be most helpful for us at this stage is getting feedback on which questions are the highest priority for us to ask, and which questions would be, if we can include them, we will, but maybe aren't as important as others. Because we know this is quite a few additional questions. I think we're planning to remove 4 or 5 questions from the previous survey. And what we've heard from John is that, as he phrased it, we have a gem of a survey, that it is the right length, and the right questions, and we have really good response rates. So we're not getting too long of a survey that's starting to fatigue people and then they don't finish it, or we're getting good response in terms of just people completing the survey, and also good response in people answering all of the questions and not leaving some blank or getting issues that cause problems in the analysis. So we're trying to keep it in that sweet spot of length. I think there's a little bit of room to add, a couple more questions than what we have, but probably can't include all of these because this is a fairly lengthy number of new questions. So from this group, I think getting some feedback on what are those highest priorities from this list of questions would be really helpful for us to then weed through and only go with those most important. So first question, we received some feedback from TPCC and the mayor specifically, wanting to get more at what are people's values in terms of the transportation system, which might be a little bit of a hard question. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what that means, but John did some research, and combined with feedback we got on a couple of existing questions at the beginning when we were asking about priorities for the transportation system, that those maybe weren't worded as well as they could be. And so what we're proposing to do is have 2 new questions in place of questions 3 and 4. And to remind you, those questions were about what are people's priorities in terms of investment, and then what are their highest priority types of projects. And we had essentially 4 responses. Let me pull those questions up really quick, just so we know. So the questions we currently have are, what rank do you give each of the following possible actions to improve the area's transportation system? And then we listed 4 that range from improving bicycle and pedestrian facilities, improving safety, reducing traffic congestion, and providing more improved public transit. And some of the feedback we got was, all of these things, or at least the first and the last, could potentially reduce traffic congestion, and so there might be some confusion or overlap there, or not sure how people are responding to that question. And then question 4 was ranking the priority of different actions, and they're sort of similar between questions 3 and 4, but it's adding and improving public transit, adding and improving bicycle facilities, adding and improving pedestrian facilities, and adding and improving roadways. So essentially, those two questions would be replaced with these new questions, one of which is open-ended, so gives a little bit more freedom for people to respond to. And then the second one that asks specifically what type of transportation investments should the Missoula area focus on. Now, with this question, we have some ability to add or change these specific responses. So if you have thoughts on those, certainly pass those along. Yeah, Shane.
One note, on some of these, like the autonomous vehicle questions, for instance, that your answers that you can give are very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, or somewhat comfortable and very comfortable. So you don't give them the uncomfortable. I don't know if you've noticed that, but a lot of your questions don't give you the uncomfortable
So it goes
option.
from very comfortable to very comfortable?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, we're biased, so it's okay. We're looking for an answer, Shane.
It may come across that you're trying to force them into an answer, but...
Well, we certainly don't want that. Yeah, I think that might just be a typo, so that's appreciate that response. Yeah, Donnie.
Just a question more than anything. So this first question, you're proposing it right there as a whole, kind of a two-part question. Okay, where they would...
Yeah, and the idea is with those open-ended questions, people will often just give sort of what's on their mind as they're going through the survey. So having sort of a two-part that has specific answers that we're maybe looking for that help them think about what we're asking about, and then the open-ended to get their sort of unfiltered feedback, if that makes sense. But this is an area where we could definitely use some feedback if you have thoughts on, how do we phrase those transportation investments? Because I think we could go a number of ways with that. We could ask about these specific types of improvements, or it could be much more general, like improve and protect the environment, improve public health, some of these bigger, broader community goals, which might take some of the detail out of the survey, but
I don't know. I like the idea of the two-part question. I mean, for one, you could get all sorts of different responses, but it's important to keep it open-ended on the first part of the question. The second one, you might have more, obviously, data that you could pull from that and actually use it. So I get it. It makes sense, and I think that...
Yep. When you were comparing the two sets of questions, looking at the prior one, there was a option to speak to safety concerns. And I don't necessarily see that as being something that an individual could highlight as a priority for investment with these bullets.
Yeah, that's really great.
So I don't know, then just your last comment there, you were questioning, is it better to have these lists of specific type of investments or these broader kind of concepts of community values? And so maybe that reference back to the safety is more related to statements about community values, but
we could certainly add safety safety improvements as one of the options here. I think that even if we went with these more specific, safety would be one that we would want to have as an option.
I think where I struggle with these questions of choose three is that there's a lot of overlap between them, and I'm wondering how complete streets falls into this, because if you had a box for complete streets, it would include bike lanes and sidewalks and vehicle capacity and or not capacity but function. So I'm wondering how we avoid sort of dividing those up and talk more about how you get a complete street that also has safety as part of it.
Yeah, no, that's good thought.
So one of my new missions is to encourage the use of streets when we're talking urban and roads when we're talking rural, because they're totally different animals. And so if we could change this terminology to streets, I think that would be useful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Certainly be more consistent with how we... All right, well, if there's no more on that, moving along. So one of our other identified data needs was related to ride share and ride hailing services. It's something we know is around Missoula, but we don't have any real good data on it. So we came up with a couple of questions related to those services. The first being, has the respondent ever used them, or are they familiar with those services? And then how often, and then asking them to list the two main reasons they use rideshare in Missoula. So trying to get a sense of how are people using rideshare, to what extent are they using it, and what are the primary reasons? Just give us a little bit of context to understand that. And I think it'll come into play in places like downtown as we think about the downtown master plan and how are we using curb space, how are people using these services, how do we plan for that?
It'll be interesting to see how many responses or get to the Kettle House Amphitheater.
Right.
I was just going to ask, I think they're good questions. Have we reached out, or do those companies provide data to the MPO in this case to help supplement? Maybe I would think they already know some of this, and I don't know if they make that public or not.
I know some of that data is out there, but I don't know that it's ever free. But it's something we could certainly reach out to those companies and see what we could get. I think they have privacy issues, so how we get that data and what it would tell us. But it's something that we should definitely pursue.
So I feel like there's, just looking through this, that there's some questions that could be combined. And a couple I'm question what the value they have.
Yeah.
For instance, how safe do you feel when you use a ride share? What's the value of that, other than just knowing if it's like everybody else in the nation, if they're safe or not? Does it have an actual usable value?
So is that under?
No, it's on page 2, top of page 2.
Top of page 2. Oh, right. Continue. That's a good question. That might not be one that's particularly useful. I think we're always trying to get a sense of how safe people feel in sort of all of their different modes, and we have some questions related to safety and reliability and comfort for other modes. But if there's a sense that that's not that useful, and this might be one that, do we really need 4 questions about rideshare and ride hailing? Maybe not at this stage. So that could be one that we leave off.
I'll give you my suggestions later. I've got a few. I think we can combine some questions and get rid of a few just to make it more brief.
Yeah, that would be great. So moving on, we have a couple of questions related to autonomous vehicles. Again, this is really just kind of starting to scratch the surface. We know this is an emerging trend. It's probably not coming wholesale to Missoula anytime in the really near future, but we know there are semi-autonomous vehicles out there on the road today. There are Teslas driving around Missoula. You can cruise down the highway without really doing anything in some of these vehicles today. So it's a good time for us to understand how comfortable people are, both interacting with them on the streets and being inside those vehicles. Again, this is kind of a first shot at getting just a sense of how comfortable people are, and then try to start addressing this in our plans more and more.
The thing that was kind of odd to me about these questions is you're asking how comfortable somebody thinks they might be in an experience that they've never experienced, potentially. Or they don't know they've experienced it.
Right.
I mean, you're right. We got a couple of Teslas running around town where all you have to do is touch the steering wheel. But by and large, I don't know whether I've crossed a street where there were driverless vehicles on it.
I think the intent of these questions is not necessarily to ask how comfortable are you doing it currently, but knowing that these things could be coming, how comfortable would you be? So trying to just get a general value statement. But you're right. I think a lot of people maybe don't know that they're out there. But hopefully they would be able to answer these questions just from a hypothetical perspective, knowing it's an option. But it's a good point that might require some.
Well, until you've experienced it, change comes really hard to some people.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to probably get more negative answers as a result of having never been in that situation.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of other surveys have shown, that people are very nervous about that technology and maybe aren't comfortable with it until they've experienced it. So hopefully it would be useful information for us to know if it's generally negative. That's something that we should work on.
And maybe it's just reading too much in it, but how comfortable would you be on a street? And am I walking on a street? Am I driving? I don't know what you mean by on a street. So you
Right,
might have
right.
different answers depending on how you are on the street.
Yep, no, that's a good point. All right, anything else on those questions? All right, moving on. So e-scooters are a very hot topic these days. There's been a lot of conversation at the city level, and so it seems like an opportune time to do some actual questions to see what, again, it's more of a general comfort level about how these technologies are operating, or the interest level in having e-scooters as a mode of transportation. So currently, the way that the city left this and the way that the state has regulated them is that they are not legal to operate in the city. So trying to get a sense of how people generally feel about them would be the goals of these questions, and generally what the concerns are. So nothing too shocking here, but again, it seems like an opportune time that now would be a great time to ask these questions, knowing that it's been in the news frequently, and there's interest in these companies incoming, and there's interest from some people in having the technology there.
It feels like, Aaron, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Can I talk? Okay, sorry. It feels like the last two questions on that are kind of the same question. You're not really asking much. Not asking for much information that's different. Or would their opinion change a whole lot? I don't think so.
Yeah. Do you think there would be a benefit? So if we asked one of those, I guess from my perspective, knowing about the e-scooter share companies is maybe more relevant than individual personal, but there's a little bit of difference there. We know and I've seen people riding them in town. I mean, they're very infrequent, but there's sort of those two sides to it, that people could be purchasing their own and riding them versus riding and using a share company. And I don't know if there's value in knowing the difference, but
I see it more as it was somebody willing to use an e-scooter, because I don't know at this point that anybody's going to be able to give you a differing opinion. I mean, there may be a very small percentage out there that have a strong opinion that they're going to get a scooter when it's available.
okay. All right. So then, electronic vehicles is something that's been, I think, kind of growing in popularity, and there's certainly a growing market for it, and there's a lot related to that. And so we have these questions related to generally, people's familiarity with it, their interest in owning or using an electric vehicle, and then trying to get at some of the concerns people would have if they are interested. What is concerning them about that purchase? Yeah.
It might be helpful if you define somewhere what you mean by vehicle.
Okay.
Because when I read this, I also think of e-bikes. Is that a vehicle or is it not a vehicle? You're clear in talking about e-scooters differently, but
Right.
if what you're after is just cars and trucks, you should say that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think on this one, you have too many choices there. Maybe try to condense those. I think the first two are very similar, long trips and feeling anxious about getting stranded.
Right. That's a good point.
What do we really want to know about that question?
That question, in my mind, it's what are we planning for? What infrastructure or what development needs do we need to support people purchasing electric vehicles? If it's just the capacity of the vehicles, that there's not much we can do about that. But if it's the accessibility of charging stations or I don't know, safety, other things that maybe we could try to start addressing.
On the charging station portion of the question, maybe we could elaborate too, or add. I think that the concern that I've heard is there's the public charging stations, but also folks that may live in an apartment or access to charging stations on their private residence that's not as available, I guess, either in some cases.
Yeah, I had an interesting call from an individual who either had or wanted to buy an electric vehicle and didn't have a garage and didn't have alley access to their house. And so they were asking if they could put their charging infrastructure into the right-of-way, which is an interesting question because that's it's sort of a right-of-way encroachment to put it in the boulevard. And then what do you do about on-street parking? Can you restrict it so that only that person, so there's some questions about how we utilize the right-of-way that as these become more prevalent are going to come up.
Yeah, and when I hear that, I think at first it was unique, but then when you really think about that question, it may not be unique at all. That's a big part of the concern. So that's at their, sole charging location. In addition to that, when I think of public charging stations, I think of ones in parking garages and things like that when people are traveling away from their place of residence.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to start thinking about. There's a lot of infrastructure needs they just function differently than fuel. You can't just stop and fill your tank up and good to go. Like you need some time and you need a location, and it can get a little bit more complicated. It's more of an individual basis than having public or commercial pumps per se.
So if we make the assumption that electric vehicles are a good thing, then what are the impediments to people using them, and what are the things we can solve in the public realm?
Yeah, exactly.
That's sort of the nature of that question.
Yep. All right, so moving on, we have some questions about safe routes to school and school-aged children's travel. So again, trying to get at more or less how children, if there are any in the households, get to school, whether they do walk, ride a bike, or maybe we could even add public transit to that. And then asking about reasons why they might not walk or bike to school. So trying to get at some of those, getting at the transportation choices that people are making or that children may have available to them in households. We had some interest in the safety of roundabouts for specific modes, so particularly people walking and riding a bike. And so these questions are really just getting at that. And I don't know, this is something we might need some feedback on. Like, we're doing a lot of roundabouts, and I don't know that that's something that we would reconsider or not, but.
Yeah, I think for me, the second question, I would maybe word that utilizing the pedestrian facilities in a roundabout rather than walking across a roundabout, because I would imagine people would envision just like.
Yeah, right. Well, you drive across them. I suppose you can walk across it too. These questions, so we just got these back yesterday, and I read through them, but haven't had a lot of time to digest. But it's interesting the walking across a roundabout versus safety and comfortable, right? So walking across versus through is an interesting word choice.
How about crossing the street using a roundabout?
Right. Yeah,
or walking across the street.
Traveling through an intersection via roundabout. I think there's a number of ways we could. I'll talk to John about how those are worded and see if there's some work we could do on that, or how other places are asking these questions. Because again, other places have likely tested this and had some responses.
So, and I think the people that do utilize crosswalks in a roundabout will know what you're asking, but I don't know how many times I've been asked why we're putting a sidewalk in the middle of a roundabout, which is actually a truck apron.
Right.
So that's kind of why I would ask that, or maybe rephrase it just so that they do understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
Are you going to include a question about how people feel about driving around roundabouts, like the elderly? Or people pulling trailers for commercial purposes? Is there anything in there about that?
We haven't. We asked sort of a general roundabout comfort question in the last survey, and so our thought was we don't really need to continue to ask those, especially knowing that there are a lot of engineering and safety reasons you would do a roundabout. But it's an interesting, it's something we could ask for sure. Yeah, no, I agree.
Aaron, I'm just curious what you would see as the differentiation between comfort and safety. I could see that being a sort of a parallel response or same response for some folks.
Yeah, I think it would be very similar. That's a good question. It's something I could follow up with John on the reason for safety versus comfort. I suspect somebody has asked these questions and there is some difference and there's a reason to, but I don't know what that is, so I can.
Chet said, because if I was answering it, I wouldn't really see the difference. If you're trying to cut questions, you can talk about combining those.
I'm interested to know if people's opinions of driving roundabouts versus signals and how that's changed over time as we've had more experience with roundabouts. So I'd still like to see that question in there.
Yeah, and one option here, and if you all have thoughts, we could just ask the same question about general comfort or safety at roundabouts that was really not mode specific. We could ask that same question again and sort of not get into the individual modes. That would give us the sort of change over time.
So Tara, you have a comment?
Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. So we're already keeping that one. Yeah. So that you're right. I mean, and we had that conversation about wanting to know kind of over time, knowing that we're going to continue to use these as an option, and there are some out there, and are people's opinions changing?
But I think there's a couple questions. One, you had mentioned that are you more comfortable with a signal or a roundabout? And I think it would be good to get the temperature on that. And I don't know if that was how you were going to ask that question. And
yeah,
I think Brian, you brought up a different point too. Was how comfortable are you driving, say, a truck through a roundabout? And maybe there's not a lot of people that drive trucks and trailers. I say truck, I mean commercial vehicle, not a pickup truck. But it would be good to know, what's the feeling from the public, and keep track of that over time, because I think hopefully it gets better.
Yeah. So then I guess the question is there enough value relative to the specific questions, or breaking it down by specific types of users versus the other data needs that we have that we're asking? Because I don't know that we could ask all of these things that we have out here. So is it general? Are you comfortable with a roundabout? And we have that really just general response rate, or is it more useful for us to get the specific user? And then how would we use that response? So if say pedestrians and truck drivers really aren't comfortable, but cyclists are, how do we use that information in planning and design?
Yeah, I think it's valuable to know how people perceive roundabouts on foot or on bike versus in a car, and then the specific user groups like the large trucks, how they perceive them. So I don't know if there's a way to restructure those questions, but I do think it's important to parse that out, because we often hear those different opinions from those different user groups.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's...
So if you want to keep the survey kind of at the same length that it is now, I think you get rid of the how comfortable are you? Because if you don't feel safe, you sure as heck aren't going to feel comfortable. So I would think that the safety question is, or how safe do you feel question is more important than the comfort question. And then you've eliminated 2 questions, and you can put some stuff in there that pertains to vehicles if you want to do that.
Okay. All right. I think we're close to the end now. So we had some interest in adding health and transportation connection questions. So one option would be just asking the general question about respondents' perception of their own health, and then one of the ways we could use that is relating that to modes that people use or how often they use, particularly the active transportation modes, and see if there's a difference. And then the other piece related to health and equity is asking about reliability and safety. So this has some overlap with other questions, particularly the safety, because we are asking a lot of, as we just talked about with roundabouts, we're asking about people's perception of their safety, but making it more general about, how safe do you feel walking in the area where you live? And so that could encompass a whole host of things like infrastructure safety, like do you feel safe, you have a safe facility, environmental safety, all of those different perceptions of, is there a difference in how people perceive the safety of their transportation? And then asking just generally how reliable is the transportation they use for the daily activities. So getting at, we ask a lot of questions about car ownership and mode choice and things like that. And we could then relate that to this question of, people who ride transit or bike or walk or drive, how reliable do they see that transportation being? So it'd get us to some of those equity questions, or if there's a difference, which I suspect maybe there would be, but it would give us that sort of evidence that there is a difference based on where people live and other demographic factors or transportation choices. And then, still going. So we have some questions about multimodal trips and trip linking. So we know this happens a lot, that people often take more than one mode, in their commute to work. So they might walk to the bus stop and then take a bus, or maybe they're biking part of it, or driving or biking to a carpool space. So this would help us understand how much that's happening. And then we have a question about car share. It's pretty straightforward, about interest in participating in car share program. And then winter travel, the question that we came up with was asking if people's mode choice changes in the winter. And one follow-up to this that might be interesting is to ask why that mode choice changes in the winter, just to get at the, if they're going from walking to driving, why is that? What are the issues that they see?
So that was my first comment I was going to make on the first question is when is the survey going to happen? What time of year? And when that'll play into that question hugely.
Yeah. So we'll do this in September. It's kind of the ideal time to do it because you have students back in session. It's still generally nice enough that people are not necessarily restricted in their mode choice, and so it gives us that kind of in between. And people are outside of their, summer travel schedules.
So how does this survey get out to the public?
It's mailed, so it's mailed out to households, and then they have the option of filling out the survey and sending it back or taking it online. And then there's follow-ups and whatnot. But what they've found, and it's the same methods that I believe MDT's survey goes through. And what they found is doing phone surveys is really not reliable anymore because of changing area code. Everyone just takes their cell phone number with them, and it's really hard to track down phone numbers to make sure you're getting a good representation. Whereas doing a randomized mailing to households throughout the region, you get a much better response.
How many surveys are you sending out?
I think we're in the 1,000 to 1,500. I think the goal is to get 600 or 700 responses for it to be statistically valid.
Okay.
And we easily did that last 4 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So just one picky thing, you've transitioned to say, please click one button.
Oh.
That doesn't work so well on a paper survey.
Yeah, right.
But the bigger thing, when you explained the first question on this page, you talked about people who split their modes during a trip. The way I read this was, did I drive one day last week and walk the other 4? So if you want the split on a single trip, you need to clarify that, I think, because that's not where my brain went at all.
That's how I read it too.
Yeah, no, that's a good, yeah.
Kind of likewise comment on the reliability question. My mind also went to their vehicle. How reliable would their car be? You kind of spoke towards the bus service and things like that. So where were you actually trying to go with that question? Was it more in like a multimodal sense, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what we would do with that information other than the work that's going on with Invest Health and some of the partners working on public health are really interested in some of those equity issues. And if we know that whether there are geographic areas or specific types of, or specific subgroups within Missoula that experience higher rates of low reliability, that we could craft strategies to try to address that. I don't know if those would be, but that would be the idea, is that information is useful for developing strategies to try to address reliability. And maybe it factors into the affordable housing piece too, that if we're, saying all of our affordable housing is going to places that have really low transit or no transit service, but we know that people who have, low income populations have low reliability for vehicle transportation, that's an issue. Because if you can't get to work, you can't, even if your housing is affordable, there are these different costs. So some of those things might be interesting to know, and I don't know if this question would get at that, but it might give us more data than we have today.
So maybe if you ask how reliable is your transportation means of getting to work or something, so that my head went to, will your car start in the morning?
Yeah, right. Which might be good to know. How frequent is that? I suspect it's a lot. Well, during the winter might be worse, but yeah, that's a good point. We'll do some further investigation into that question and see if there are other ways we could refine it.
Okay.
So those are all the questions. So if any feedback about, which questions are kind of the highest priority would be really helpful to narrow this list down, assuming we can't do all of them.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments? All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
Good questions. All right. I guess we're on to announcements and closing comments. All right. Hearing none, seeing none, we will adjourn. Thanks, everybody.